Welcome. In this session, we're going to explore how to conduct behavioral research in a way that directly informs your marketing and branding decisions. My goal is to give you a practical framework grounded in behavioral science, the same principles used in academic research, but translated into a format that any business can apply immediately. Behavioral research is often misunderstood as something complex, expensive, or reserved for large organizations with dedicated research teams. But the truth is, the most powerful behavioral insights often come from simple, structured approaches that anyone can learn. What matters is not the size of your research budget. It's the clarity of your questions, the rigor of your methods, and the discipline of your interpretation. By the end of this session, you'll have a clear understanding of how to design behavioral research that avoids common pitfalls, produces unbiased insights, and leads to more confident, evidence-based decisions. And importantly, you'll see how behavioral science can elevate your brand by helping you understand not just what customers do, but why they do it. Most organizations rely heavily on what customers say in surveys, interviews, and feedback forms. But behavioral science has consistently shown that stated preferences often diverge from actual behavior. This isn't because people are deceptive, it's because human decision-making is complex, context-dependent, and often automatic. When customers respond to a survey, they're reflecting on their behavior in a rational, deliberate way. But most real-world decisions, especially consumer decisions, are made quickly with limited attention and under the influence of subtle cues. This means that traditional research methods often capture what people believe they do, not what they actually do. Behavioral research bridges this gap. It focuses on observing real actions, identifying the contextual triggers that shape those actions, and uncovering the psychological mechanisms that drive them. When you understand behavior at this level, your marketing becomes more precise, your branding becomes more resonant, and your decisions become far less risky. In other words, behavioral research gives you a more accurate map of how customers navigate your brand and where the opportunities for improvement truly lie. The behavior gap is the space between intention and action, and it's where most marketing challenges lie. Customers may intend to buy healthier products but choose convenience. They may intend to complete a purchase but abandon the process when a small barrier appears. They may intend to stay loyal to your brand but switch when a competitor makes the choice easier. Understanding this gap requires shifting your focus away from attitudes and toward the situational and psychological forces that shape real-world behavior. Behavioral science teaches us that people often make decisions based on habit, heuristics, and environmental cues, not deep reflection. For example, a customer might say they value sustainability, but when faced with two products on a shelf, they choose the one that's easier to reach or more visually salient. This doesn't mean they don't care about sustainability. It means the context of the decision overpowered the intention. When you study behavior directly, rather than relying on what people say, you uncover the hidden constraints, motivations, and frictions that truly drive consumer action. And once you understand those forces, you can design marketing and branding strategies that align with how people actually behave, not how we assume they behave. A powerful way to analyze behavior is to break it into 3 layers: context, cognition, and consequences. The first layer, context, refers to the environment in which the behavior occurs. This includes physical surroundings, timing, social cues, and even the emotional state of the customer. Context shapes behavior in profound ways, often more than personal preferences do. The second layer, cognition, involves the mental shortcuts, biases, and heuristics that guide quick decisions. People rarely evaluate every option carefully. Instead, they rely on patterns, familiarity, and cognitive ease. Understanding these shortcuts helps you design marketing that aligns with how people naturally process information. The third layer, consequences, is the observable behavior itself, what people actually do. This is the data you can measure: clicks, purchases, sign-ups, drop-offs, hesitations, and choices. When you examine all 3 layers together, you move beyond surface-level explanations and begin to understand the deeper mechanisms behind consumer choices. This layered approach is foundational in behavioral science, and it's incredibly powerful for marketing and branding because it reveals not just what happened, but why it happened and how you can influence it. Every effective research project begins with a behavioral question, a question about action, not opinion. This is a fundamental shift from traditional market research, which often asks customers what they think or how they feel. Behavioral research asks, what behavior are we trying to understand, predict, or change? For example, instead of asking, do customers like our website? A behavioral question would be, where do customers hesitate or drop off during the purchase process? Instead of asking, what do customers think of our brand? Ask, what behaviors signal loyalty and what triggers switching? Behavioral questions anchor your research in observable outcomes. They force clarity and prevent you from drifting into abstract territory where insights feel interesting but not actionable. A strong behavioral question becomes the compass for your entire research process. It guides your choice of methods, shapes your hypothesis, and ensures that every data point you collect ties back to a real business decision. Without a clear behavioral question, research becomes unfocused and often leads to insights that are difficult to apply. A robust research plan doesn't need to be complicated. What matters is structure and clarity. The Minimum Viable Research Plan, or MVRP, is a simple, disciplined approach that mirrors academic research but is streamlined for business use. Start with your behavioral question, the specific action you want to understand. Then articulate a plain language hypothesis, your best guess about what's happening and why. A good hypothesis is specific, falsifiable, and grounded in behavioral logic. Next, choose a method that aligns with the behavior you're studying. If you want to understand friction, interviews or audits may be best. If you want to test a causal relationship, A/B testing is ideal. Identify the behavioral variables you want to observe, things like motivation, friction, clarity, or choice architecture. These variables help you focus your attention on the mechanisms that drive behavior. Finally, define your decision criteria. What will you do if the data supports your hypothesis? What will you do if it doesn't? This step is crucial because it ensures your research leads to action, not just insight. This disciplined approach keeps your research focused, unbiased, and directly tied to business outcomes. Behavioral interviews are one of the most powerful tools in your research toolkit. Unlike traditional interviews, which often ask for opinions or preferences, behavioral interviews focus on reconstructing actual events. The key is to ask people to walk you through the last time they performed the behavior you're studying, step by step, moment by moment. This method reveals the micro-frictions, emotional cues, contextual triggers, and decision shortcuts that shape real behavior. For example, instead of asking, "Why didn't you complete your purchase?" ask, "Tell me what happened from the moment you decided to buy until the moment you stopped." This subtle shift uncovers details that customers may not consciously notice, like confusion about a button, uncertainty about shipping, or a moment of hesitation caused by unclear information. Behavioral interviews are especially valuable because they capture the richness of real experience. They help you understand not just what happened, but how it felt, what cues were noticed, and what barriers emerged. These insights are often far more actionable than anything you'll get from a survey. A/B testing is essentially a controlled behavioral experiment, one of the most rigorous ways to understand what truly drives action. By changing one variable at a time, you can isolate the causal impact of that change on behavior. This method is powerful because it reflects real-world conditions. Customers aren't asked what they prefer. They simply behave, and you observe the outcome. This eliminates many of the biases that plague traditional research. A/B testing is especially useful for optimizing messaging, pricing, layout, and calls to action. But its value goes beyond optimization. It helps you understand the psychological mechanisms behind behavior. For example, if a simpler headline outperforms a more detailed one, that tells you something about cognitive load and processing fluency. The key to effective A/B testing is discipline. Test one variable at a time. Ensure your sample is large enough to detect meaningful differences and avoid drawing conclusions from small fluctuations. When done well, A/B testing provides some of the most reliable behavioral insights available to businesses. A behavioral audit is a systematic evaluation of the customer experience through a behavioral lens. You're looking for friction, anything that increases cognitive effort, introduces uncertainty, or disrupts momentum, This method is particularly valuable because friction is one of the most powerful drivers of behavior. Even small barriers, an unclear button, a confusing form field, a moment of hesitation, can dramatically reduce conversion or engagement. During a behavioral audit, you examine your website, packaging, messaging, or customer journey step by step. You ask questions like, is the value proposition immediately clear? Is the next step obvious? Are we asking the customer to think more than they need to? Are there moments where attention might drop or confusion might arise? Behavioral audits often reveal that the biggest obstacles to behavior are not lack of interest or motivation, but poorly designed experiences. Removing these barriers can lead to significant improvements in performance, often without changing your product or your message at all. Interpreting behavioral data is where the real value of research emerges. Data collection is relatively easy. Interpretation requires discipline, structure, and behavioral insight. Start by describing the behavior itself. What happened in concrete terms? Avoid jumping to explanations too quickly. Then explore the underlying mechanisms. What contextual or cognitive factors might explain this pattern? This is where behavioral science becomes especially powerful because it gives you a vocabulary for understanding the psychological forces at play. Next, translate those insights into implications for your brand or marketing strategy. What does this behavior tell you about customer motivation, perception, or friction? How does it align with or challenge your assumptions? Finally, identify the specific actions you should take. Behavioral insights are only valuable if they lead to meaningful change. This four-step framework, observe, explain, interpret, apply, mirrors the analytical process used in behavioral science and ensures that your insights don't remain abstract, but instead drive evidence-based decisions. Let's walk through a simple example. Imagine you have a landing page with high click-through but low conversion. At first glance, this might seem like a messaging problem or a product issue. But when you interpret the behavior through a behavioral lens, a different picture emerges. High click-through indicates strong initial interest. Customers are motivated enough to engage. Low conversion suggests that something in the experience is creating friction. Perhaps the value proposition isn't immediately clear, the form feels too long, or the next step isn't obvious. This insight is powerful because it shifts your focus from trying to increase interest to reducing friction. You might simplify the layout, shorten the form, clarify the benefits, or make the next step more intuitive. This is the essence of behavioral research, using observed behavior to guide precise, targeted improvements. Instead of guessing or relying on opinions, you're making decisions based on how customers actually behave, and that leads to more effective marketing and stronger branding. Behavioral insights extend far beyond UX or conversion optimization. They inform your entire brand ecosystem. For example, behavioral research can help you refine your positioning by revealing what customers truly value, not what they say they value, but what their behavior indicates. It can sharpen your messaging by showing you which cues resonate and which create confusion. It can guide pricing decisions by uncovering how customers perceive value and what trade-offs they're willing to make. Behavioral insights also improve customer experience by identifying where momentum breaks down, where attention drops, or where expectations aren't met. And they influence packaging and visual identity by highlighting how design shapes perception, trust, and choice. In short, behavioral research gives you a deeper, more nuanced understanding of how customers experience your brand and where you can create meaningful impact. It moves branding from intuition to evidence, from assumption to insight, and from guesswork to behavioral precision. The most effective behavioral research programs don't start with large studies or complex experiments. They start with small, focused tests. Pick one behavioral question, run one small experiment, apply one insight, then repeat. This iterative approach mirrors how behavioral scientists build evidence over time, through cycles of observation, testing, and refinement. You don't need perfect data to make progress. You need disciplined curiosity and a willingness to learn from real behavior. Small, consistent improvements compound into significant strategic advantage. This approach also reduces risk. Instead of making large, sweeping changes based on assumptions, you make small, evidence-based adjustments that gradually improve performance. Over time, this creates a culture of behavioral thinking, a a culture where decisions are grounded in how customers actually behave, not how we hope they behave. A few common pitfalls can undermine behavioral research, even when the intentions are good. First, avoid relying on opinion-based questions. They rarely predict real behavior because people often don't have full insight into their own decision-making processes. Second, avoid testing multiple variables at once. When you change too many things, you lose the ability to isolate what caused the change in behavior. Third, avoid over-interpreting small samples. Behavioral insights should be grounded in patterns, not anecdotes. Fourth, avoid ignoring friction points. Friction is one of the most powerful drivers of behavior, and even small barriers can have a disproportionate impact. Finally, avoid jumping straight to solutions before understanding the underlying behavioral mechanisms. Effective behavioral research requires patience, structure, and a commitment to understanding the why behind the what. When you avoid these pitfalls, your research becomes more rigorous, your insights become more reliable, and your decisions become more effective. Behavioral research isn't complicated. It's intentional. When you focus on real behavior, you make more confident, evidence-based marketing and branding decisions. Start with one behavioral question, run one small test, observe what happens. Interpret the behavior through a behavioral lens, and let the insights guide your next move. This approach doesn't just improve your marketing, it strengthens your brand by aligning it with how people actually think, decide, and act. Thank you for joining me. I hope this session gives you a deeper appreciation for how behavioral science can elevate your decision-making and help you build a brand that resonates more deeply with your customers.